everybody. Thank you for attending our session about JavaScript and Lightning components. Just a gentle reminder that this is like a developer session, and it's expected that you have like an understanding of JavaScript and basics of Lightning components. And we are going to see lots of code in this one. So we introduce ourselves. My name is Edith. I am a developer at Designit. That is a company that is a consultancy specialized in Salesforce solutions. We are based in Bristol in the United Kingdom, and there is a branch in Seville, Spain. And my colleague?
Yep. Hello, everyone. My name is Julio Fernandez. I'm also a certified Salesforce developer, and I work for the same company, Designit, but I'm based in Spain. And I'm also the leader of the developer group in Seville. And this is my Twitter handle, just in case you want to follow us and ask any questions later. So let's get started. This presentation is about the transition and our journey from monolith JavaScript application in Visualforce to a modern Lightning app. So we're going to be checking what the original application was. Who has experience with Visualforce in the room? Okay, so we're going to see the original application, and it's Dreamforce 17, and we're going to see Salesforce Classic. You wouldn't expect that, but we're going to show it. And we're also going to check what it looks like in Lightning. So we're going to start by explaining what the original application was, what the requirements were, what it looked like, and how we built it. And then we're going to have a quick overview of Lightning. Then we're going to check the actual migration process, and we're going to check the Lightning components that we built, and we're going to be focusing on one of our custom components. And we're going to end up having just a quick demo of what it looks like in Lightning. So this application is one of the first internal applications for Designit. So we wanted to have an app that allowed us to manage events, plan events, and publish them, promote them between attendees and people we were targeting to invite to our events. We wanted to have an application that made it easy to add new objects, so it had to be flexible so that we could search people on any object that had a related relationship with the contact object. So it had to be really dynamic, so we wanted to use quite a flexible search criteria so that we could search on any objects that we wanted. So building that on Salesforce Classic was really challenging, and it was really exciting for us to be able to produce something that is dynamic in quite a static, using quite a static way of developing, because Visualforce is quite static, but we needed to add a lot of user interaction to the app. So we also had to refresh our JavaScript skills, because we had done a lot of Visualforce stuff, but not such JS intensive. So we had to refresh it, and it was really challenging. So it was really good to do.
Okay, now I will show you the original application. This is just like a reference for you to see the Visualforce page that has the JavaScript code behind. As you can see, it's just a typical classical application. We go to our events page. If I click on a specific event, I can have all the information related to the event. When is it going to be, where, what time, and all the communication with my invitees. But the main thing that we want to show you right now is the functionality that let us invite people, the right people, to our event. So in this is the Visualforce page that has lots of JavaScript in here. As you can see in the top, we can select several criteria to search for my invitees, and I can include or exclude them. For example, I can say, for this breakfast, I want to include all the people that I invited before to my breakfast in September. So as you can see, this is an autocomplete. It's going to be added in this part and also in the summary. So I can continue creating my criteria. In this case, for example, I can say I want to exclude all the people that are located in the United Kingdom, because this is going to be here in the United States. And I can continue with all my criteria. When I am ready, I can review the invitees, and it will just kind of do a basic search and show me all the people that I can invite.
Okay, so that's the app. The list builder is the main page in which we're going to be focusing. And as I said, well, it's quite a dynamic page, and it lets you interact with it quite well. And we had to use a lot of JavaScript on client to implement this. And we also used a lot of jQuery because the autocomplete functionality was provided by the library, and it was really good. But because we were a bit outdated in the use of JavaScript, we ended up using not the best practices, and because it was an internal project, we wanted to get it to work as soon as possible. So we made a few mistakes that we're going to check now, and we're going to fix when we do the migration. So for example, in order to have the state of the different search criteria, we were using global variables. And as you may all know, using global variables, it's not a really good practice.
Another practice that we used was to adjust the panels we had, or manually. So we had to search for the panel using jQuery and assign the height and width to each of them every time the user wanted to resize the window, for example.
And another thing we were doing was accessing sections in the page directly from the DOM. This is a security risk because you are exposing every part of the page to any other section. So it was something that wasn't the best practice.
Another thing was to manually assign the event handlers for our elements. For example, here I am searching in jQuery an element, and I'm saying that every time the user clicks on this element, I will execute the function add search criteria.
And finally, we have all of the previous items here, but just focus on the fact that they are included within a script tag. This is inline JavaScript, so it's also something that will not be allowed moving on to the Lightning components.
Okay, so what is the problem? Is there really a problem with the application that we built? Because it was working and it was functional. Well, for us, like a personal journey, the company, once we finish the application, they come back to us and say, well, now we want it in the App Exchange. Well, it's really not ready for it. There are so many security elements that are in the App Exchange that cannot be allowed. For example, some practices that we use. After we finished this application, we had another customer that had not exactly the same, but similar requirements. Like, for example, FieldAutocomplete and some elements from this page. But we really couldn't reuse the code. It was just like copy-paste the code or something like that, because we didn't have like real components. The original application was very difficult to debug, because at the end, what you end up is with a big, massive kind of page that has all the JavaScript kind of duplicated in the page, and it really wasn't easy to debug. And something pretty important is that security matters. Some of the practices were exposing on our application, so it really wasn't kind of ready to go to the App Exchange. So what is the solution?
So the solution is Lightning, of course. Let's just point some of the features of Lightning. So the whole Lightning experience offers a few features The first one is the Lightning experience, which is the user interface. It's a modern application compared to the Salesforce Classic. Then we have the Lightning Component Framework, which is a set of tools provided for the developers to make it easy to comply with all of the Lightning component requirements. Then we have also the Lightning App Builder, which is really useful once you have your components ready, and it makes it really easy to drag and drop them into any app that you need. And finally, we have also the Lightning Design System available, which is one of the things that helped us the most, because we didn't have to worry about changing the size of our components, because that is all done automatically by Lightning Design System. So this is the layout of a Lightning component in general. So we have for Lightning components we have client-based and server-based files. On the client, we've got the Lightning bundles, which is like a packaged list of different files, and that implements the client side and implements the view and the interactions. So the view is the file in an XML format with the XML tags to give you the layout of your component. Then we have the JavaScript files in the bundle, and that's the controllers that are listening to the events that happen in your visual interface, and it will also connect to the backend if it needs to retrieve any information from your Salesforce database. And then on the server, we've got the Apex controllers, and that's usual Apex classes that will be the part that we're going to be able to reuse the most.
Okay, something that is related to security is the LockerService. And sometimes maybe some of us are worried that our application won't be compliant with LockerService. And well, let's review it a bit. Well, LockerService is a security architecture for Lightning components, basically. What it does is isolates your components to their own namespaces. So every time you want to kind of use window or document, for example, you are using like a wrapper for your own namespace, and you are not using the whole window for the whole page. It enables JavaScript in a strict mode, and this basically is kind of trying to enforce good practices for JavaScript, because before LockerServices, you could just kind of create magic variables without declaration and things like that, and that is not a good practice, for example. It uses security policy. So, for example, in this case, with LockerService, you won't be allowed to use inline JavaScript anymore. And, well, maybe most of you know, but from summer 17, LockerService is already there for your components if you start creating the components with the API version 40. So now, what are the libraries that are compliant with LockerService? In this blog, you can find a list of the libraries that have been tested for LockerService. This really doesn't mean that if you want to use a newer version of the library, you can't. You just try it, and if it just goes all right, well, it's okay. But this is the one that has been documented so far. And let's say that you want to create your components in Lightning. What do you have to do to be compliant with LockerService? Well, first of all, avoid libraries that are not compatible with LockerService. Then always be aware that a strict mode of JavaScript is going to be enabled. So, for example, always declare your variables, and don't use like practices that are not kind of good practices for JavaScript. Do not load images or other resources, for example, JavaScript libraries from external websites. Always use static resources rather, and just load them into your Salesforce instance, for example. And it's recommended that you use Salesforce Lightning CLI. And this is just a parser for your code, and it will tell you the wordings of the elements that might be kind of risky to use.
So let's start with the process of migrating our app to Lightning. So the first step is to identify your components and see how the granularity that you can have in your app. You need to define the components, and you need to bear in mind that moving to Lightning, there will be a lot of components that can be implemented by default. So you'll be able to use standard Lightning components from the standard libraries. So if you go to that, if you go to your org and you append the following URL, component reference /suit.app, it'll redirect you to the gallery of elements that you can use by default with Lightning. For example, in our app, we've got the drop-down to have the include and exclude version, so we are implementing that with a standard Lightning select. Once we have defined the components that we need for our app, we need to define also what it's going to do, the functionality that it's going to provide. Apart from that, as we've seen, our components were communicating with other parts of the page, so we also need to find out how the new components are going to communicate among them. And this is very important because it's going to have an impact on the number of attributes that our components are going to have, and also the events that they need to fire or they need to be registered to. And finally, we need to go back to the server side and check what pieces of code we're going to be reusing, we can reuse from our Apex classes. So this is a screenshot of what the new app looks like in Lightning, and it is very important to stress that your app should behave in the same way. And what we've built is something really similar to the Visualforce page. So we've got the different search criteria at the top, and we've got the different selections on the main side of the page, and then we have also the summary on the right-hand side.
Okay, so now we are going to see an example. We selected a specific Lightning component that we are going to be working together, and at the end we will see the result and how we can add it to the app builder. So the first step that we follow in our approach was to identify the components. This is the original application in Salesforce Classic, and this step is very interesting and exciting because this will kind of define the reusability of your components. You have to define the granularity. For example, you can create a component that is the whole page, but that won't be reusable at all. So for example, you can detect the components or the elements of the page that can be used many times, and you can define that as components. In this case, for example, what we found out that is, for example, the FieldAutocomplete is going to be used many times. So that is a candidate for a good reusable component. What is going to happen with this field is that I will send the object that I want to search on, and also the text that is going to be displayed on the text field, and that's going to be enough to make it reusable.
So let's define our component. Our component is going to be a text field, and the functionality it needs to provide is to suggest a list of values based on the string that you input on your text field. A very important thing is that it needs to be flexible enough to allow you to perform searches on different objects. And finally, it needs to, once you select the value, the chosen value, it needs to communicate with other parts of the application. So it'll have to send events to other parts of the application in order to send the right information to them.
So in the design stage, we took some decisions about how we were going to code this component. For example, we decided that we are going to use a text field that is a standard HTML field, and we were going to add the Lightning styles. This is something that you can do, just add the CSS class, and that is going to add the style to your field. Another thing that we were focusing a lot was to reuse the most of the code. We already had the original application, so we really didn't want to create everything from scratch. So we reused the jQuery component, that is the autocomplete one. This was allowed because our version of jQuery was the 2.2.2, so this is compatible with LockerService. We also reused most of the code of the Apex backend. Is the code that makes that searches for the records. And we were also going to publish an event that will tell other components when the user selected a value. So here is the first step that we did. This is kind of starting to create a component. And we can see in the top, we are using a basic Lightning component. We specify the controller, and we also say that we are going to implement this flexi page available for all page types. This is important because if you want to include this component in a Visualforce page, just in a, let's say it's not advisable, but maybe you have a Salesforce Classic application and you just want to have a Visualforce page, just adding these implements will let you put your components in that page. The next step was to define the attributes. And this is important for the reusability. So we defined before that we need to specify the search type. We also need the label for the text input and the object we are going to be searching on. And finally, we also define the input. That is a normal input with Lightning style, and we define this as well. This is the first part that is going to be part of the view of my component.
Okay, so we've just defined the look and feel of the new custom component that we're creating, and so we already have the text input field, but now we need to add the functionality to be able to request searches on the back end by typing a string value within the text field. So the way in which we've implemented this is by adding a new attribute to the view of the component, and this attribute is a Boolean, and we've also added a change handler to that attribute. What this does is every time you type, that the value of that Boolean is changed, and that then triggers the action in the controller. So if we see the diagram, we've now moved to the controller side. So those are the JavaScript files in the bundle, in the Lightning component, and the controller usually should only be redirecting your events to the helper. So in this case, we're listening to the change on the Boolean attribute, and we are redirecting the action to the helper. And finally, the helper is the main part of the JavaScript side, and we have three main sections here. The first one is where we are gathering the information from the view. So we are accessing the values of our component just by using the actual component. So we're not using jQuery or the DOM to access the values in the view. Then we are setting the parameters, so the things that we've read from the view, we are setting those parameters, making them ready to be sent back to the server. And finally, the last action is performing the request to the server. And that's going to give us the suggestions. This is the final part of our Lightning component, and this is the server side. This is the Apex controller, and this is almost exactly as it was in the Visualforce. The only thing we've had to add here is the Aura-enabled annotation, and that is to allow your method to be invoked from a Lightning component. But the rest of the code is exactly as it was for our Visualforce page. So we can see that on the back end, we can reuse most of the code we've already done.
Okay, now the last part for our component is the communication with other components. In this case, as we can see in our page, our component is going to communicate with its parent component. That is kind of the search criteria that is outside. In this case, I will use an event of type component because that communicates between child to parent. So the definition goes into a file that is of type event. I will define my event, like it's an Aura event. is going to be a type component as we defined before, and the events can have attributes. In this case, it's going to be just the selected option, that is what the user selected. So I go back to my component, and I add an extra line that is going to tell everybody, hello everybody, I'm registering an event that is going to be of this type, and every time the user selects something that goes basically in the helper, that event is going to be fired. And how can I fire this event? I just get the event that was defined before, I set the parameters that I need, and I call the fire method.
So let's have a look at the new app, and this is going to be already in Lightning. And let's first go to the app builder just to see what our application looks like there and what types of components we have. So this is the layout of our application. So we have the header, in which we have the different search criteria, and then we have the container to keep adding the different selections to search, and finally we have the summary container. If we see on the left-hand side, we have not only the standard components, but we also have the custom components that we've created. So these are this is what we were after. We needed to make our components ready to be able to use in the Lightning app builder, so that you could have them for any application that you want. So if we now go back to our app, let's see how it behaves in Lightning. Let's just see the list builder. So we can select a campaign. So we're going to include people who came to Dreamforce 17. So here we can see that we've selected, and the include section of the campaign search has been updated, and also the summary has been updated. If we now add a new event, let's exclude people that came to All the Dreaming's breakfast, and we have updated the app accordingly. So we now have our application, we have the components, we have the communication between them, and a very important thing is to stress that all of this is really responsive, and we haven't done anything special to make it responsive. So every time I change the size of my browser, it all becomes nicely adapted to the size of the containers. And if you access this with a different device, a mobile phone or a tablet, it'll be fully ready to work. And we haven't done anything special. It's just by taking advantage of Lightning design system that the interface is responsive.
Okay, now we already saw both applications. So how they both compare. The new application, that is Lightning application, it has security. We already talked about LockerService, and LockerService is there for you enable once you create your Lightning components with version 40. The design is responsive, as Julio just showed to you. If I change the size, everything changes or adjust to the page. We can now really reuse components as in software engineering terms, not just copy-paste. The components are just there, kind of ready to be added to another application. And the code is maintainable. It's really nice how Lightning components kind of force you to have different elements in different files. The XML is in one part, the JavaScript is divided between controller and helper, and the backend. So that way, when you have problems, it's easier to debug.
Okay, so we've done the whole journey. We've done the design, we've done the coding, and now we've got our new application. So what conclusions can we get from this experience? What we got from this work is, one lesson is that migrating a Visualforce app into a Lightning app is not impossible, but it's not effortless. It's not just a one-click thing. You need to work, but it is not impossible. It is doable. We've done it, so it is possible to do. The advantages that the Lightning framework offers make it worth the effort, because you'll be getting a lot of benefits from having a Lightning app. We've seen that we've been able to reuse the code, so it's not that you need to throw everything you've done away, and just create everything from scratch. There are a lot of things that we can reuse. We've used all of the Apex code. We have reused also the use of the jQuery library for providing us with the drop down of the suggestions. So there are still parts that you can reuse. A very important thing to stress is that you need to make sure that your application, your Lightning application, is not still a monolith. We could have just taken our Visualforce application and wrap it in a Lightning component, but it wouldn't have the granularity to let you use the autocomplete in a different application. It would just work in Lightning, and it would have the look and feel of Lightning, but it would still be a monolith. So this is very important. That's why you need to follow the whole design and make your clever decisions to make your different components work in other places. And finally, the last thing is that LockerService is your friend. When you're starting developing Lightning components, it may be a bit of a pain because you need to take a lot of things into account, but what LockerService is doing is just giving you the right direct instructions in order to follow good practices. So as you start using it and you start finding things that you cannot do, it's just easy to switch, and it is giving you the right learning path. So it is there to provide you with a good practice in development, and it is going to provide you with a secure application. So thank you very much for attending. That was our journey from Visualforce to Lightning, and this is a list of resources that we've used not only to prepare this session, but also to do the actual migration from Visualforce to Lightning. I'm sure the sessions will be shared with everyone. They might even be recorded and published in the Dreamforce YouTube. And we have a few minutes if you want to ask any questions. Do you mind coming to the mic? Okay.
So you showed the JavaScript that you wrote, but can you go over how you got that into the client, like into the DOM? How you loaded your JavaScript into the page?
How you load your JavaScript into the page? So that's done automatically by Salesforce. So Sorry?
You referenced the helper that you built in JavaScript.
That's what the Lightning component framework provides you with. So the Lightning component is a bundle of a few files, and they are all interconnected. So you refer to the helper by using the helper keyword from the first controller, and the first controller you refer to it by using the C dot and the function name. And that's what the Lightning component framework is. It gives you some guidelines and how to connect the different components, the different files within the same Lightning bundle. So when you open, you create it from the console, and when you create a component, it gives you a list of the members of the bundle that you need to implement, and the view is always there, and the controller and the helper is also there by default. But you can also add additional, so you can add different files to the bundle. If you wanted, for example, to have a special style, you could add a CSS file to the bundle, but that's not provided by default. But everything you need for your Lightning component is packaged in the Lightning bundle, and the communication between the different files is provided by the documentation on the Lightning framework for developers.
Any other question?
No?
Thank you,
Okay.
everybody.
Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of Dreamforce. This is almost over.